to try to go through today and get these learning objectives is understanding the different types and delivery models that are associated and why we have to estimate, how to set up a complete estimate, understanding the soft costs, the non-bricks and mortar piece that have to go into those estimates, and then getting a trade perspective, the subcontractor side of what goes into it and how us as GCs and CMs take that information and put it into the overall estimate so we can provide a number. So that being said, we're going to talk about the different types of estimating there are and why people request pricing. Really, there's, let me say, three major ways of requesting information from an owner, and that is an RFQ, which is request for qualifications. An RFQ, what they're asking for is basically what are your qualifications, what is your strength, what have you done that has been comparable to these types of projects, and they'll select a team member early on. Usually this type of process happens before documents have really even started. An RFP is along the similar natures, but they usually ask for a cost component associated with some level of documents. So it could be something that's SD or even a concept or a narrative. And then a hard bid lump sum is when documents are 100% complete and you're able to get a full number from that, and usually that's what people select that once on the documents. So all of these pricing methods come up with the level of document completion. Document completion, I guess in a architectural community, can come in the form of, say, four major levels. Conceptual, which is nothing more than a napkin sketch. It could be a narrative. We want to build a 70,000 square foot office building with so many square feet per office. Basic stuff. SD documents are typically when the documents are 25% complete. DD is when they're 50% complete, and production documents are 100%. 100% documents are typically when they get to the permit level, when documents are submitted to the city for approval and permit. And of these levels of completion is how they kind of fit into those other levels of contracting. Lump sum, as far as a delivery model is concerned, is a traditional hard bid lump sum, lowest responsive number wins the day, and you're bound to what's on the documents, and vice versa with the architect and the owner. What's on there, what you see is what you get. CM at risk is another delivery model in which a construction manager would be brought on board early in the process. You would take a set of documents, and they could be at DD or at SD or CDs at that point. And what typically during this delivery model, the owner is looking for a partner or a person that's collaborative with them to give them a guaranteed maximum price, so that at the end of the day they know where they're going to be at, but the contractor's taking some risk in filling in some of the holes that the architect maybe not have gone to. This kind of ties into where that level of document completion is at, and you're not going to have all the full details at the end of the day. Agency CM is a delivery model in which the construction manager or general contractor would take the documents and administer the management process, but not necessarily hold the contracts. You see a lot of this relating to municipalities, in which the owner will hold the prime contract, and then you'll have a CM on board that will administer that process, and they'll also help administer the bidding process as well. And then design build is similar to a CM at risk. The difference here is that the architect now works for the contractor. It works very well in a delivery model where you're fast-paced and you have to get in the ground while they're still finishing documents. From a contractor's perspective, it's a good way to be able to control costs because you're the ones that are feeding and working with the architect throughout the process, and it gives the owner a level of reliability that at the end of the day you're still at the GMP, but you're working through and cutting some time out of the process. Any questions? I don't want to make it sound like a lecture. If you have any questions, Alon, please feel free to ask. Any questions regarding delivery models and I guess document completion levels? No? Okay. The next stage, we're going to turn it over to a group of our GCCMs, and they're going to explain to you the basics of setting up an estimate.
I'm Brent Raymond, Belmont and Johnston. Normally I'm a project manager. I take my hand at estimating every now and then. I usually have to live with what estimators give me. Setting up the estimate. When you're setting up the estimate, typically as a general contractor, and this is important to note even for the subs, you will go and you'll take an Excel form and you'll go down with the CSI code. You'll look in the specification book, and it's a great way to start the skeleton of your estimate. Look at what the owners and architects are saying belong in the building, what products belong in the building, concrete, masonry, and then all the specialty products, because you don't want to miss anything. The second part is you're going to look into the scope, looking into the plans. A lot of people are going to want to start with the plans first. I highly suggest you start with the spec book, because you may miss something in the plans, and it's going to be in the specification book. And if there's specification about a fancy pants tack board, and you don't happen to see it, you need that reminder to go back before you miss a fancy pants tack board, because it's on drawing 56 of 156, and you're caught without the funds for that tack board. Now that you have a skeleton, a way to track your costs, you need to, for a GC, we need to make our plans available to subcontractors. Typically, we do that through the Builders Exchange, or we have our own plan rooms. I do want to note that there's one tricky. Builders Exchange is great. A lot of us has probably done it. We've gone online. We've looked up the things that are ours, especially subcontractors. The one thing that it doesn't give you the ability to flip the drawings and see what might be yours on drawings that you're not really looking for. I know how it is. You're plumbing, and you want to open up all the plumbing pages and look at the plumbing aspects of it. But you didn't open up the mechanical drawings, and you find that the architect or engineer put requirements for some of your pads, concrete utility pad by plumbing contractor, and they put it on they're tricky that way. They do that. And so the plan room is great. Anytime you can go to a plan room, or if you're a general, you're looking at all the drawings, to get a good idea of what the entire project is. Builders Exchange, great, but always be aware that there could be scopes of your work not specifically on your drawings. Is there anybody here being caught with a front-end spec, a requirement that you may not have thought of? I'm going to throw out one: phasing. Has anybody bid a job, not realized the project's phased, and then you're into the job and you find out, wow, I didn't have that covered, or strange cleanup requirements, strange hours, requirements. That's typically all found in the front end of the spec. And I'm going to say most of our mistakes, all of our mistakes, the lion's share of them is going to be in that document, the front spec book, the solicitation. If you're a subcontractor or a GC, you need to read those things and find out all the little nuances that you're going to owe on the project. A great example is for general contractors, a lot of CMs will require us to not only provide them with an office trailer, but we'll have to provide equipment, refrigerators, a coffee maker for their trailer. Typically, it could run up to $10,000 just to fit out the trailer for the CM, and then you have to pay for the rental of the trailer. On one particular job, we had to run a temporary sanitary to the trailer so they could have a working toilet. If you miss those things, those are big dollar items down the road that you could get caught with. So if anything that I speak about, the one thing I would really have you remember is look at the front end. That's where all of those strange requirements will happen. Even if you're a subcontractor with a specific scope of work, you need to know what the general contractor is going to require of you. Because when we hire a subcontractor, we just don't hire you for your scope of work. We're hiring you based on the complete package that was put out there. All the specifications, drawing A to B, all the addendums, the whole package. So, and then the last item is attend pre-bid meetings. Now, granted, as a subcontractor, you may not be able to attend every pre-bid meeting. You're going to have to get a feel for, if plumbing, and I'm gonna stay on plumbing. If it's a large scope of work, then you need to attend the pre-bid meeting. Go through that front end spec first. Have the questions armed, because the other thing is that you do is there'll be vague issues, and you ask those questions prior to bid. It gets put into an addendum, and that arms you. That arms you either to price it up, or it arms you to defend yourself once you're in the contract, that you don't have to, perform a specific task of work. So read the front end specs, attend the pre-bid meetings, be armed with some questions to be able to ask, the owner. A couple of typical questions that general contractors will ask are permits. A lot of times, if it's city work or government work, the permit is typically by, the city or the entity that's performing the construction. But if it's a private client, they may not have the permits. They may require the general contractor to pick up the permits. Tap-in fees. Tap-in fees are requirements. They're fees that are assessed by how much water or sewer use the building's going to have. And they could be a large sum. In some buildings, they could be hundreds of thousands of dollars. Those are great questions. If they're not spelled out in the specifications, or if the specification says permits and fees by contractor, you need to know, does that include the tap-in fee? Some cities, that's part of the design fee, and it won't be required. And some, it's part of the building permit, and it would be required. And insurances as well, and my cohorts will talk about different types of insurances, but as they're telling you about the insurances, remember to look in the spec book, find out, what's going to be required of you, and be able to ask the owner. And as you go through your life of estimating, you will make mistakes, and you won't repeat them twice, and you'll have that little list in your head or on your desk. And as you're going through the spec book, did I see this? Did I see that? And those are and when you don't see them, those are the questions you're definitely going to want to ask. Now I do think I've used up my 8 minutes, so I'm gonna turn it over to Mr. Vega, who's going to give you a little bit more detail about the breakdowns and general conditions.
Again, Mark Vega with Infinity Construction. I'm going to kind of expand on what Grant was talking about a little bit. So my first question for you guys is, who knows the CSI codes? Anybody here know all the CSI codes? Now I'm going to ask one of these guys, what's concrete? 3300. What's site work? 2200. It used to be. They just changed the CSI codes a few years ago. So for all of us who've been doing this for however many years, the CSI codes have changed. It used to be 0 through 16 or 17 for electrical and technology. Now it goes up to 48. So I'm jumping around here on my numbers, but it goes up to 48 now. I couldn't even tell you what comes after the 20s. So there are 48 different codes. They use all different numbers now. If you would like a copy of those, give me your name afterwards and I can email it to you. But it was 200 pages long. So there are so many codes out there now, but that's how we break down an estimate, is by those CSI codes. So when Grant was talking about taking your Excel spreadsheet and setting up your codes, that's the first thing we do, is we take the spec book and we go through it, take every spec section that's in there, 2200, 3300, 4200, whatever it is, and list those on your Excel sheet. That's how you set up your bid. So now you have all those codes and what the heading is for each code. You make sure that as a general contractor, when you're getting bid day and you're getting sub numbers, you have something in each of those codes. So make sure you go through the spec book, grab the codes out of the spec book. There may be ones in there you've never even seen before. You get into a lot of specialty work, and that's where the later codes come in. When you get into conveying equipment or sanitation equipment, those are the later codes in the book. But you might get into that on a job. So just because you're a general contractor or a subcontractor, you go, oh, that's the code I normally don't use. Not necessarily. It may be something that if you're an electrician, your code is the 16,000 numbers, but something in the 40s, conveying equipment, might tell you what you have to do for that work. So make sure you go through the spec book and look at all the codes. Zero code, which I have on here, is the bidding and contract requirements. That's what Grant was talking about. That's the front ends. And that is, as a GC, one of the most important things, like he said. So make sure you read through it, because as a contractor, there's somebody doing roofing. When I write you a subcontract, I'm including that whole section in your subcontract, the zeros, because that's the general requirements that you're required to include. So that's why you have to read them, like Grant said. Allowances, alternates, and contingencies. A lot of jobs nowadays, owners are getting funding from whatever funding source, and they can't go back and ask for more money later. So what they do is they add contingencies or add allowances to the job. And they'll tell the general contractor, carry $200,000 for some item. We'll call it allowance one, whatever, it's included in your bid. Then they'll say add $10,000 for roof patching. That's in your bid. Well, as a sub-trade, if you're the roofer, you need to make sure you included that $10,000. And these guys will get into later about reviewing scopes and things like that, but that needs to be in somebody's bid. So take a look at those allowances, contingencies, and those types of things to make sure if you're including it as a sub-trade, you notify the general or vice versa, and Grant and Randy will talk more about that later. But that's why you got to make sure you as a sub know what those alternates and allowances are, and as a general, that somebody has those included. Did a job recently where the alternate or allowances added up to over $1 million. You're adding $1 million to your bid. If you forget it, you're going to get the job. Not the way you want it, but you're going to get it. So going into the Division 1 on their general requirements. This leads into general conditions. Okay, as a general contractor, we have what we call general conditions, or back page costs. A lot of people call them soft costs, things like that. And going back to Mark's comments about the different delivery methods, some of these costs that are in the general conditions may be picked up by the owner if you're doing a CM type job, and he'll hold those dollars rather than having the contractor hold them. If you're doing an agency CM and you're the owner's representative, you're watching all his money, so you got to monitor these costs. As a lump sum bid, you're the general contractor, you have all these costs in your number. So we call them soft costs, and that term gets used differently depending on what delivery method you have. But they are all costs that sometimes there's not a defined number that you have to put to these numbers. So how do we develop those costs, and how do we know what we're looking at? So the first thing we do is we develop a schedule and a site logistics plan. Now, people look at you and go, wow, you're building a schedule, you don't even have the job yet. Well, yeah, I need to know how long this job's going to take so I can determine what my general conditions and soft costs are. Most general conditions and soft costs are time-driven costs, meaning my superintendent is going to be out there for how many months? It's a 16-month job, I have to put him in for 16 months. Well, I don't know that unless it's in the documents and I read it, or I develop a schedule and determine that. And a lot of jobs nowadays, owners are actually making that part of your bid. What is your schedule? How long is it going to take you? Because I say it's going to take me 12 months. Mark says it's going to take him 14 months. Well, my cost might be higher, but I get it done quicker. They may like that idea. So you develop that schedule ahead of time. In the lump sum world, when you're just competitively bidding, if the owner tells you it's 16 months, but you say I can finish it in 15 months, you can maybe cut some dollars out of your bid because you're going to finish it earlier. It's a risk, but there's that option. So you always develop a site logistics plan and a schedule so you can put your general condition costs together. So what's in our general conditions? Lots of stuff in general conditions. This is just a list of a few items that we include. So starting down the list, kind of give you a quick brief explanation of them. Permits and licenses. Things that you need to include. So does it require a site fence, a perimeter, a security fence, or whatever? That might be an item that's on the documents. You are required to have a fence around the site. It also may not be an item that's on the documents. But you know the area you're working in, there's a chance of vandalism. You may include a fence in your number because you know that you risk a bigger loss if you don't have one. So these are all things when you're estimating that you have to weigh these options of what do you include and what you don't include on the general condition side. Temporary utilities and toilets. Obviously, you got to have running water for the masons to work, concrete guys, plumbers. You got to have bathroom facilities for everybody on the job. And obviously, you need to know how many months you're going to need these facilities. So that's why your schedule ties in again. Grant talked about temporary sanitary for a trailer, for an owner or a CM. It's something you got to include there. That's part of your temporary utility costs. Winter weather protection. This one here is one that on every job, I'll look at the guys along this wall, and we'll all think differently about winter weather. Because what do I include? You're building a building and you're starting in September. I'm going to be doing masonry through the winter. What do I have to do to build that masonry? Do I have to build a tent over the entire building and keep it heated to run my masonry? You know, we all laugh about that, but I've done it. I've built a tent over a building so that I could build it in the winter. So winter weather is a very big cost that you'll see jobs that may have a tight schedule like that, and you'll wonder how guys are $300,000 or $1 million apart on their numbers. That's a big part of it. How do they look at doing their winter weather protection? So that's one that you always want to look at the schedule to determine what you're going to need on winter weather. Cleaning, dumpsters, final cleaning. Another cost that can vary. It can be through the roof, or it can be very cheap depending on how you look at doing the job. You know, cleaning is getting to be a very big issue with most owners, especially if you're in existing buildings. If you're obviously on a public street where you're going to have to clean the street, you know, these are all dollars that you have to figure out how you're going to clean this job and know what your subcontractors have included in their job for cleaning. You don't want to double up. Obviously, you're just raising your bid. So cleaning is another one. Safety and protection and security. I just did a job downtown Cleveland. Had to have a security guard there from when we left in the evening till the next morning when we came in. It was a requirement in the contract from the owner, but we had to include the cost. So now you got to look at that option. Am I using a security company? Am I hiring police? What am I doing? So those are costs that you got to figure out to put into your general conditions. Job office, office furniture, supplies. Are you having a trailer on site? What's going to be in the trailer? How many people do I have there? How am I going to have security on my trailer? Do I have those types of things? All things that, again, you got to go through, figure out what you need to do the job. You know, Grant talked about your spreadsheet. Obviously, most companies have one already set up from day one that has all these items listed, and you go through and figure out if you're going to need it or not. So you're not recreating the wheel on every job, but yet you got to look at every item individually, specifically for that job. Travel expenses. Is my project manager, my superintendent, driving between multiple jobs? Is he on one job only? I don't have travel expenses. So, could be minor dollars, could be a decent expense. Some companies might include job vehicles in that. You know, if their superintendent has a company truck, they got to pay for that truck somehow. They put it in here, or do they put it in his hourly cost for their supervision? Office staff. We all have an office, accounting, secretarial, you know, safety officers. Those costs usually aren't in your job specific costs. You don't want to inflate your bid by putting in your overhead costs. So what most people do is they have an overhead line item at the bottom of their page that they do on a percentage basis, whether it's a percentage of the overall job, a percentage of their general condition costs, a percentage of just their direct staff costs. So there's a lot of ways to do overhead, and those 4 or 5 general contractors that are up here probably have 5 different ways of doing it, and the 4 or 5 subcontractors probably do it 5 different ways. So overhead is not something we can tell you how to do it, but obviously you're going to have those costs. So you've got to make sure they're included. Staff benefits, workers' comp, all those types of costs need to be included in your bid if they're for your direct staff on the job. So your superintendent, he's directly working on that job, you're going to include the cost of that person in your bid. You're going to include your project manager. He may not be there full-time, he's half-time, so you include half of his cost. But the benefits that go with it, workers' comp, all those types of things, you want to include in that cost. You don't want to carry that in your overhead number because it's going to vary from job to job, and most companies use their overhead number as the same percentage across all jobs they bid. Now, it may get different depending on if you're CM, if you're GC, because your overhead or your office cost could be different. If you're a CM, you have a lot more upfront costs on paperwork and things like that. You may bump up your overhead costs. On a GC job, you'll have a lot less because you're not in there in the front end during design. The last thing to make sure you include in your general conditions is insurance, bonds. I mentioned them, but Randy's going to get into more detail on them, explaining to you all the different types of insurance and bonds.
My name is Randy Spencer. I'm from Dunlop and Johnston. We are also a general contractor, construction manager here in Cleveland. I do want to thank Glenn and the CEA for allowing our committee, which is sort of a committee within the CEA, the opportunity to kind of come out and talk about estimating. Our goal is the committee in here is to kind of hopefully improve the future of estimating in our industry at both the subcontractor levels and the general contractors levels. Most of us are competitors against each other in some way, shape, or form, but quite frankly, we believe that some collaboration within the industry will improve the industry, and certainly in a market right now that is particularly challenged. What I'm going to talk to you about today is sort of some of the mundane stuff. It's not the bricks and mortar. These are items that are kind of more, definitely a part of these soft costs or these general conditions that are costs that are incurred kind of at a corporate level for the most part, but are items that, if not considered through the bidding process, will result in a company not being around for very long. I'm not going to get real specific with these matters. Some of them actually have been covered in separate classes put on by the CEA, but please ask questions along the way. If you do want to dig into something a little bit deeper, be happy to do that. Insurances. The first four bullet points that you see here: liability, indemnity, special insurance, and builder's risk. These are basically all different forms of insurance that exist within our industry. Okay, liability insurance we've probably all heard of. There's a wide range of what that covers, but basically if somebody out there, whether it's the general public or another contractor, decides that they want to sue you, you want to have insurance behind that, because that can get very expensive, and this insurance is not cheap. Liability insurance traditionally breaks down as a general contractor to work that you have subcontracted out, because quite frankly that carries a separate premium, okay, versus work that you're self-performing or doing with your own labor. Okay, there's a different premium level for those two. Office, property equipment, auto, computer, internal theft, a lot of overhead type insurance that you might cover. It was mentioned earlier that you as a company are going to do so much work every year, you have to cover the costs of those, because those are fixed costs. Those costs are going to be paid through the profits of your projects. You need to consider those costs as you're doing your work. So without getting into deeper into liability insurance, just make sure that you, in some way, shape, or form, whether it's in that spreadsheet at the bottom line as a number or a percentage, or you can break it down into how much of that work is subcontracted at that rate, etc. Just make sure your estimate is considering those costs. Indemnity insurance is very similar to that. The front end that we talked about, traditionally the owners will require you to indemnify them. General contractors require their subcontractors to indemnify them. It's a flow down or flow through effect. You need to make sure that you have the costs to be able to provide those indemnifications included in that estimate. Real quick, special insurances. If you're working for, these are just some examples. If you're working a project near railroads, okay, certain contractors, they have coverage for work within 50 foot of a main line of a railroad, for example. We've done work in the past for Norfolk Southern, okay, we have that. Other contractors, maybe they don't. But if you're going to build a building, I mean, it's just a typical building, but it happens to be within 50 feet of the main line of a railroad, you need to have insurance coverage, okay? That's definitely an additional cost to some contractors. Hazardous materials or pollution liability. Depending on where you're working, the kind of site, the kind of material you're working with, you may need to pull an additional policy specific for that project. You don't want to eat those costs when you find out later that they're in fact going to require that. You want to include that in the bid so the owner pays for that up front. Professional liability. One of the delivery methods is design build. If you're not doing design build on a regular basis, you're not carrying that policy as a company. But yet if you have a favorite owner that all of a sudden chooses to design build a project, you need to carry that liability, because you're definitely going to be held to those responsibilities. Builder's risk. Builder's risk is an insurance policy that should be purchased on every project that you get involved with, whether it's a renovation job, whether it's new construction. What that policy covers is the materials, the project as it's under construction, the materials that are on site and stored but maybe not yet put in place, and materials that are in transit. Okay? Take an air handler that's coming from California, runs off the road or off a bridge, it's shot, it's useless, it's wasted. The builder's risk will step in and basically take care of getting a new air handler to that site. If you have a fire, if you have a collapse, if you have a calamity on the site, Owner's not gonna pay twice, right? They hired you to put the building up. It's not their problem necessarily that a tornado came in and knocked it over. That's happened to my company, okay? You have to have a builder's risk policy in place to cover tearing down those walls that maybe they were structurally damaged but didn't come down. That's what happened to us. They were damaged so badly they couldn't hold a roof that was not yet on the building, okay? So what you need to do as an estimator is find out who is paying for that policy. It's either provided by the owner, or they will stipulate that you as the contractor are to provide it, and if you are, you're going to carry the cost of that. A job's got a $100,000 premium on a builder's risk. You can't eat that. You need to have that price in that bid. And it does vary based on the amount of the cost of the project. What's also important to notice is if you're in a multiple prime situation. If you're bidding a project for the state of Ohio, for example, your mechanical, your plumbing, your electrical primes, your technology packages are typically separate primes. They're bid directly and the contracts are held directly with the state. I've seen the language both ways, where they will stipulate that each contractor will procure their own builder's risk policy for their scope of work. It can get messy if you do have a claim to deal with. I've also seen, and this is very difficult, where they will stipulate that the general contractor will carry the builder's risk policy for the whole job. That's difficult because you don't know what the plumbing costs, you don't know what the electrical costs, you don't know what the sprinkler is going to cost. So you either have to take an educated guess and be willing to undertake that risk. For example, real quick, if let's say the general trades is worth $6 million, you got $1 million electrical, you got a $500,000 plumbing number, etc. They want you to cover the builder's risk, so you have to assume that all the bids are going to come in at $10 million and carry a builder's risk policy premium in your bid for the $10 million. Don't see it a lot, but I have seen it. Quite frankly, we've walked. Notifications to the bonding agent. Also, time management, you want to do that early. The bonding agent traditionally will tell you ahead of time what your bond premiums are. Is everybody familiar with the bond process? Okay, very simply put, there's bid bonds, payment bonds, performance bonds. There's also maintenance and warranty bonds. We won't get into those today, other than to know that, again, if the front end requires them, there's a cost. And talk to your bonding agent to get that cost and include it in the bid. A bid bond is a guarantee that basically stipulates that your company will enter into a contract and perform this project for the price that you turn in that very day. Because if you make a mistake, they can hold you to it. And the bond is basically a guarantee that stipulates you agree that you will be held to it financially. That could include actually having to perform the job for that price. It could include if the entity does want to let you out of it, there are costs to re-advertise and re-secure somebody at a higher price. They will hold your company responsible for that difference and the cost to advertise, print drawings, everything. So estimating is a serious business when you're submitting bid bonds and the guarantees that go with it. So you need to talk to your agent early because you need to get that bid bond. Many entities have different forms that they're required. The state's different from Cleveland. Cleveland State is a state, but the state's different, for example, for OSFC, or maybe different from a private client who's using AIA documents, etc. So if you're going to manage your time, you need to get that bond from your bonding agent. They sign it, they mail it to you, they hand deliver it, whatever. You need to get that in time because it is always turned in with the bid. You need to talk to them, as I mentioned, how long is the project? We talked about schedule. Durations of projects affect bond premiums, and different sureties are different. Okay, so you need to know specifics as to if the job's 16 months long, there's typically a bond surcharge, for example. If the job's 12 months long, it depends on the surety or who's the bonding company that you're working with. They have different requirements, but you need to know them, include them. With the bid bond, make sure that the boss signs it. I was talking to a competitor last week, $8.2 million project they were low on. Bond was not signed, and they did not get the job. So you don't want to put all your time into this and basically blow it over failing to get the boss to sign the bond. There's a power of attorney and a state of Ohio certification that is also required typically, which just validates that the surety is an entity that can do business in Ohio. Without those, your bond is null and void. That's the fastest way to get tossed. Okay? You need to know very simply payment and performance bonds. A payment bond is just a guarantee that you as a general contractor will make sure you're guaranteeing to the owner that you are going to see to it that every subcontractor, supplier, tradesman, Union Hall is getting paid for the work that they've put into that job, in a nutshell, okay? There is a cost that comes with that. The performance bond is just a guarantee that you're going to do the job, you're going to do it per plans and specs in the right time frame. And if you falter, the owner can contact the bonding company and demand that they step in and take over the project to finish it for you. That comes with the price. Okay, owners want those guarantees. Those are hefty premiums. You need to know if the job's bonded and included. Very quickly, permits. If the permit is going to be procured by you in your bid, you need to contact the cities, the counties, wherever you're working in, and inquire as to the pricing for that, because they run the gamut. We just found out today the city of Wadsworth does not, down at the bottom, city of registration. We're going to start some jobs in Wadsworth. They don't register contractors. Great. City of Cleveland, you got to be registered to do business in the city of Cleveland, and they want you to write a check to get signed up. Include that in your bid. Okay. Let's see. Contacting local authorities. Do they have specific requirements? What's it going to take to close a lane? I'm going to touch on that briefly, but some of the bigger projects in town, you're going to close a lane for a year. A lot of times those kind of lengthy closures fall on the general contractor. You better find out what it takes to do that. Part of the scheduling and the sequencing. Can you even do that? You may bid the whole job figuring that, you know what, you don't need a giant crane because you can close a lane and park right next to the building for this, that, and the other. You find out after the bid, there's no way they're going to give you East 9th Street. So now what? It's all overtime, it's all Sunday work, kind of things you need to know. I mentioned city registration. Make sure that you know what the costs are. And we touched on tap and utility fees. The key there again is just to know who's paying for those. And if it is up to you, for example, is it Cleveland Water Department or is it another water authority somewhere else, call them. They publish a lot of it even on their websites, but know it going in. There's a lot to cover. Are there any questions on... Very good.
Just to give a little bit of perspective, so far we have spoken about, I'm gonna put in perspective, a $6 million job. Up to this point, we've all talked about general contractors. I'm the last one. The rest of our fine gentlemen are going to speak about the subcontracting aspect of estimating. But if we're talking about a $6 million job, we've spent a lot of time talking about general conditions, which is probably going to be $250,000, $300,000 of a $6 million job. But that is the part that really differentiates, with all things being equal, if we're all the good general contractors receiving all the same good quotes from subcontractors, and we're all plugging in the low qualified number, the only thing that's going to differentiate ourselves is the general conditions. And that's where we're a general contractor will typically make or break himself or herself, is with the general conditions. That's why we spend so much time on it. But now you have your spreadsheet, you have all your soft costs, you've done the investigations, you have your cost for your bid form, for your bonds and your permits, and your superintendent and your durations and your winter conditions that you thought of. Now comes bid day, and it's fast and furious. Subcontractors, I love them, but they are going to send you their quotes at the last minute, and you're going to have to take these quotes off, and you're going to have to look at them, and the low number is not always a good number. You're going to have to take a look at that and see, do they include everything? And the only way you're really going to, you can't remember everything. So on your spreadsheet, you're going to have listed certain items, certain particulars, glazing. If there's a special frosted glazing at the clear store, you're going to note that down. So when you get quotes in and you're looking at them, you want to see, do they have this? Do they have this before you plug that in? Because you may get a $1 million masonry number, and that's $250,000 lower than your next mason. Why? Is it because it's a good number, or is it because they missed something? I mean, it's, and you need to know that because you're putting your $250,000 at risk when you go in with that low number. So the first thing I'd like to say is here comes the quotes, and not all numbers are the same. You really need to know through your week, 2 weeks ahead of time, your investigation through the bid documents, what's going to be required in each scope of work. One other item that really helps, and I think for all the sub-trades out here, this would be a really good piece of advice. There's only ever been one perfect person, and he wasn't an estimator, he was a carpenter. There's no way that an estimator will know top to bottom every nut and bolt about the project and be able to estimate it all. One of the great keys on estimating, but don't rely on it, is when you get those quotes in and you can compare plumber A to plumber B to plumber C, what do they include or exclude, and you will see things that you have missed. You know, I have this special stainless steel piping that's required in the sub-basement. What? I didn't see that, you know, and when I took off the plan, when I looked at it, I didn't see stainless steel. Well, do the other plumbers have it, you know? One thing that is really helpful for general contractors and subcontractors, when you're experienced and you think that your competition isn't pricing up the right stuff, price it up and then make a big note, make a big bold note, with a Sharpie if you need to, you know, stainless steel piping. And even if you show the value of that, you know, the value is $50,000. That will force general contractors to take those quotes and compare them to get it to apples. Because we all get frustrated when we lose a job to somebody who didn't do it right. I mean, that's the biggest frustration in this industry, I would have to say. So when you do that on bid day, instead of hiding it, put it in there. If you're not sure if it's required, put your base number and then make it an alternate. Let the general contractor, that's our responsibility, take those risks to understand the complete set of plans and to put those numbers together and to submit a complete package to the owner. Gray areas, scopes and coordination, that's experience. There will come a time where in the estimate where you can't find a number from somebody. You can't, you're going to have to do your own little takeoff. You're going to have to put your guess. You know, recently I did a job and they talk about having a crossing guard for school. It was a school. So during my construction entrance, I have to have a crossing guard. There is no prevailing wage for crossing guards. You know, I don't know if I'm going to hire the housewife across the street or if I have to have a 310 laborer out there, you know, to get the kids across. So you're going to have to take a guess, and it would love to guess high, but the higher you guess, you lower your chances of getting to work. So you do need to look out for those gray areas, areas that you don't get filled. You know, if you have your spec section on your Excel sheet and you're filling it out and you're getting ready to turn your number in, you go down it and there's a hole. It's not filled, you know. I would, typically what we'll do is if it's included somewhere else, I'll put INC, you know, included. If one trade covers multiple items, I'll put their names in multiple items. So when I scan down, I'll see if there's holes in there, something that I have to take a guess on, and how comfortable are you at that point taking your educated guess. We would never guess $1 million Mason package. You would let the estimate go by. You can't guess on something that big. And I know we're running short here, but I'm going to speak a little bit alternate pricing, and you're going to love this. About 4 weeks ago, I bid a library. I bid a library in Warrensville, and I was $28,000 low on $4.5 million, and I was feeling good. And there were alternates on the job, alternates that the owner can accept or not accept. I had done very well at taking my project manager hat off and estimating and only putting those things in that were needed. Had I put anything else in, I would not have been the apparent low. Came to alternates and I put my project manager hat back on and I wanted to make sure I was covered. And so I wasn't as aggressive with some of the credits that I could have been or should have been. And it put us in a place where, depending on what was selected, we could end up losing the library. And in fact, I did lose the library to that fine gentleman right there. so by $3,000. But fortunately, that same day, I was low on another $6 million school, so my euphoria came back. But alternates they're important. Don't let them slide, especially for subcontractors. They take on a much greater importance. If you have portion of that alternate, that can really make a difference on who the general contractor ultimately gets the job, depending on what the client selects. For us, alternates tend to be a very small part of the job, even though in this case it made the difference. But if you're a subcontractor and you have that alternate, that could be a large portion of your work that will make a large difference if you get selected by the general or somebody else. Okay, I'm going to wrap up real quick. Bid day. Bid day, it's very hectic. You need to have somebody there. Typically as a general, we have somebody at the site where you have to turn in the packages. You have to give them enough time to hand write down 2 copies, possibly 3 copies with all the alternates. You have to give them time to get those numbers in, because 1 minute after the bid, the box closes and you're done. If it's not in there, it doesn't matter if you were low or not. Okay, bid day. So you've given your person enough time to put the envelope in, and this is for public bid. Stay there. Make sure you get all the numbers. Make sure you understand. Take a record of them, because they're going to also tell you where you're at. If you're constantly sky high, then you're doing something wrong. If you're really low, you're doing something really wrong. If you're second or third, stay the course. You'll get there. You'll get there. Don't do anything dramatic. On private work, make sure you follow up. It's just like an interview. You turn your number in. Owners like to deal with people they like. It's just like everybody else. If your number is competitive, you may not know that. They're not going to tell you. But they may not call you if you're not following up. So make sure you follow up. And for subcontractors, you won't know with generals. You need to find out which general looks like they're going to get the job, and then follow up with them. Nag us. That's what we're here for. So just keep calling. The last item, prevailing wage or diversity requirements. On estimates, a lot of times, and it's become more prevalent, you have to list your edge participation, or possibly MBEs, FBEs, WEs, DEs. You need to be able to list those things. And so leading up to the bid, you need to get a good idea which contractors are bidding you, subcontractors, which ones meet those requirements. How are you going to fulfill that requirement of the bid? In some cases, you might get a large scope of work, like the masonry, that will fulfill it, and you don't have to worry about it. In other cases, you will need multiple EDGE certified contractors to get your 5%. But again, if it's a requirement, there's no sense in bidding it if you can't make the requirement. If it's a goal, you need to be as honest as you can and write that down on the bid. But you need to be aware that at the last minute, that's going to be there. You're going to have to put a number down, and you don't want to get caught with your pants down, not knowing what it is. After a general gets the job and they sit back and now they need to let contracts out to subcontractors, we really want to work with the people that helped us, the people that got us there, because that's building relationships. We're going to do it again. Now, obviously, you're competing against everybody. Plumbers are competing against plumbers. You're not going to get every job. We're not going to get every job. There can only be one plumber. But typically, we're going to lean towards the people that helped us. And it could be as simple as putting, EDGE certified in big bold letters, because we see it, so.
All right, Craig and I are going to basically start the trade estimating part. We're going to talk about how we put together a trade estimate compared to the general contractors. It's quite different at the end of the day. Theirs is more, obviously general. They're looking at putting organization of everyone's into the right spots and everything like that. Their big stress happens on bid day because they got to put everything together and make sure they don't have any holes. Where the trade estimators have to help them fill those holes, and could be 70 different people sending marked numbers on bid day, and he's got to look through them and all that stuff. So we have to do our part is to give them the best number and presentation that we can on bid day so that they can be successful, and then with our relationships pass it on down. So we're going to go through it a little bit. Craig and I I work in the interiors, metal studs, drywall, carpentry aspect, and
I work for VIP Restoration. We have 3 specific divisions. We've got a glass and glazing division, restoration division, as well as a new unit masonry division, which is the division in that eye roll.
So him and I we do estimating a little differently. So we figured both of us would kind of come up and we give both of our experiences, so you have a little bit of both ways of doing it, and we'll go from there. Craig, you want to do the first one about acquiring the documents?
As they had explained on the general contracting side, what happens is they'll send us invites or we'll get phone calls, and it's up to us to kind of take a look at what's involved in the scope of work. So what we'll do is, there's two ways of actually doing it. We can get the hard copies, which you can go to the general contractor's office or you can go to certain plan rooms to look at them, flip through it, find out what the specific scope is for you, and determine if you want to go and take it further and bid it. With the internet and electronic capabilities now, though, Bills Exchange is probably one of the best sites that we use, that you can actually go on site. If you have a membership or if you get a private project number from the general contractor, you can go in, take a look at the project too electronically, and then determine what drawings you need, what's in the specifications, and also to see if it really does make sense for you to bid the job.
Without paying the money.
Right, without paying the money. And it's a lot of it's preference too. It's how do you put the estimate together? Are you more comfortable doing it with the hard paper, drawings sitting on your desk, or are you doing it with a software package that is geared electronically? I know Brian does it a little bit differently than I do. I actually prefer the hard copy drawings, so this way I can mark them up, flip them over, take a look at them. Brian uses more of an electronic version, but I think he supplements it with half-size drawings.
So after you decide you're going to go ahead and you're going to bid this job, the first thing that estimators do in the trades is we go through the specifications. You sit there, you look, okay, which specifications pertain to my company and my scope of work. We may bid some of the specs, we may bid all the specs that that our company can deal with. That's when you make your decisions of how you want to take apart your estimate. Like for mine, I can look to see, okay, is there plaster in this job? Is there spray fireproofing? Are there acoustic ceilings, wood ceilings? And at least gives you an idea of what's all involved. Going through the specifications, I always take very good notes of what to look for in the drawings. It's a big key. If you sit there and say, well, there's a note here that says that there's a specialty wood ceiling that I know that can cost $100 a square foot, I'm going to find that someplace somehow, or I'm going to ask the question of where is this. That's a very important thing. The second thing is to flip through the drawings before you start a takeoff or anything. Same thing. You kind of go through it. You look for it. You see, okay, how big is this job? What's involved? Where's it at? Location. How are we going to stock it? You get just a general idea of where you're going to go with it, and how you're going to go ahead and do your takeoff. Am I going to do the exterior first and go on the interior, or am I going to do ceilings? It kind of gives you a whole overview of that. And then after that, that's when you kind of go from there and you start building your proposal based on what you're going to work on. And we'll go back to more of the takeoff as the next step, but basically once I'm done looking at the drawing, I actually build my proposal to send to these guys. So I have a format of how I'm going to start working. Okay, these are the spec sections we're going to include. Here's my base bid. There's 3 alternates or additional items that I need to price. I can put those on there now so I won't forget it. Go through, I put my qualifications. We're not, we exclude this or we include this. To make sure it's always there, and I keep that right to the side of me, so as whatever I'm working on, I can just go ahead and put it right in my proposal. It never gets lost in translation. I don't write notes on the drawings or anything like that if it's something that the general contractor needs to know about. It's one of the best things that my relationships with the general contractors will say is, hey Brian, when you give us a number, we know that it's there. You got everything, and if you exclude something, there's a good reason why. You're not trying to pull a fast one on us. You're saying, well, I don't have. We have all the metal studs, but we don't have the drywall. It's a good thing, and that's getting the respect and relationship with them. So as long as you keep giving them the proper proposals the way they want to see it, it will help with securing work.
And the general contractors estimators are also going to they're going to look out for you too. So if there's something that you're sending over as a scope, but they see something that maybe you didn't see as a subcontractor, they're going to identify that to you too, and then you're going to go back and say, oh, all right, I need to add this to my proposal and get the pricing together. So quantity takeoff, again, it's different on anybody who's doing it electronically, manually. I think pretty much everybody's doing it some form of electronically. I know personally I use Excel. With the masonry components in the job, I could have 40 different line items, and it really all depends on how it's being taken off. You know, you've got a wall here, you know, when you look along this wall, this is a good wall. This is a production wall. You look at that wall right there, that is not a production wall. So you need to figure out, you know, how many man-days does it take here, how many man-days does it take here, and how you're going to actually do the takeoff. Excel seems to work good for me because I can actually identify each wall separately. It gives me my average, which again, in this business, it's all about law of averages. So, Brian, I know uses something a little bit
Yeah,
differently.
basically one of the things, and Glenn mentioned it, there's an advanced estimating class. Anyone interested in trade estimating, it's a program that I use. It's called On-Center Software. It's a pretty expensive program by all stretch of the imagination, but it's a good class. The guy who's training it is a phenomenal teacher, and he can give you what electronic estimating really is and what's involved and everything like that. If you choose not to use that program, that's one thing, but at least you can get a better idea of how we go about it. So like what I do is I'll take a job and basically, you know, we get these drawings here, and basically using a mouse and nothing else, we color code the lines, and it tells me that for this wall I have 100 feet. And 100 feet is X amount, it tells me, and then I put it into my other program, it says 100 feet, that's 25 sheets of drywall. And I could say that a guy can hang 20 sheets of drywall a day, so that's 1.25 or whatever man days times what a man makes an hour, and it multiplies everything out. I don't have to do any of the math, puts everything there, and then I can say from there I could have all my cleanup requirements, supervision requirements. I could put my overhead in what we used to call profit, it's now overhead still, into one line item, and everything is basically automated, and you can definitely still make mistakes and everything like that, but it's very trackable. So if Mark comes to me and says, hey Brian, we're eliminating this wall, I can really quickly go and delete that wall, and my price changes automatically. It's very helpful for speed and, in my opinion, accuracy. I can go up to the general contractor and show him my takeoff on a job and say, hey, I have a red line here, I have this wall, or here's what we have. And it's a very effective tool as far as going and putting everything together.
So it's called On-Center Software?
On-Center Software, and as I said, it's the one that the advanced estimating class will come, and Kevin Miller, who's coming in, and it's the program I've used for 10 years. It's pretty efficient.
And there's some. I mean, even in our division, we've got like one of my estimators has a package called Tradesman. So what that does is it actually provides a 3D model, builds the building up. You can actually pull things out, put things in, and it changes the whole composition of the wall. The last item I did want to talk about was this building the conditions, or the condition, your crew composition, how you're going to put it together, because that's probably one of the most important parts of the estimate. I think that it's probably safe to say you've got a fixed component and a variable component. The material is primarily fixed. When the economy is bad, you have fuel prices going the way that they are, that might change things on the material, but in most cases, your material is a fixed cost. Labor is your most important thing to make sure you have right. So when you build a condition, you've got to go back on historical data, figure out what's your crew composition that maximized your profit. Was it, did I have 5 bricklayers and 3 laborers? Did he have, 5 carpenters and 1 laborer? Those are things you need to look at as you're putting your estimate together to make sure that you're putting a competitive bid together, but also to make sure that you're going to make money.
Hey guys, I'm John Arcena with the Acme Arcena. We do specifically metal stud drywall, ceramic tile floors, things like that. So I'm going to gear my conversation more towards the finishes. But the stuff I want to talk about are some of the nuances in a project that you're going to have to put in for an estimate. And in order to be in construction, we have to get our material to a job site. So first I want to talk about some deliveries and lifting. We have 2 specific projects I want to talk about. An existing building downtown, Key Tower for example, and a new project being built from the ground up in the middle of a field somewhere. What are some of the differences you might encounter getting material to each different project. Traffic. If anyone's taken a truck and left it from their office at 7 in the morning, you'll probably hit traffic on 77. It's going to take longer to get a job, to deliver material to a job downtown than it will out in a rural area somewhere. What else?
We say the height of the building, how far?
Height of a building.
How many floors you gotta go up?
Let's say it's a 6-story building. How are you getting the material up to the 6th floor?
You gotta see if they got a freight elevator.
Freight elevator?
Or can it be lifted up?
If it's a new building, it might not have a freight elevator.
So can it be lifted with a lift?
Maybe a crane?
Right.
Who's providing cost for the crane? Crane company. That guy. Maybe the general general contractor, maybe the subcontractor. You have to read the specifications and the scope of work to see who has to provide that cost. How about in an existing building, elevator size? You have to think about elevator size. If I have a 4-foot by 10-foot sheet of drywall, I can't get it in an elevator door that's 3 foot by 7 foot. So I may be walking that drywall up 3 or 4 flights of stairs. Also, at a new job, buck hoist operator, if there's a buck hoist, who's picking up the cost for the operator? If you have night deliveries and you need a standby electrician, who's picking up that cost? Things like that. Mobilizations. We're good on this slide here. Mobilizations. Who's ever been a job that said multiple mobilizations may be required for this project? Everybody has. And what does that mean? That means if something goes wrong, you need guys all over the building to fix it, of course. Well, as a drywall guy, I like to walk into a room like this and see 4 walls ready to hang. Studs are up, rough-ins complete, hang all 4 walls and walk out of the room. Well, let's say you're bidding an office and the owner has these extravagant big desks and you can't get them into the building in the normal sized door. So you need to leave off a 10-foot section in each room of studs and drywall. That means you have to figure for a crew to come in, fix the studs once the desk is in, put the drywall back on, separate crew to tape the drywall, and then that's also going to affect the painter and casework guy and anyone else that comes after him. Scheduling. It's important to not only know your schedule when you're bidding a job, but other contractors' schedule. We bid a job in an existing hospital where it was an 8-foot by 200-foot corridor, and on one end of the corridor there was an electrician pulling wire above ceiling, and on the other end of the corridor there was a guy installing ceiling grid, and below them both was my company installing the floors. So that's not your typical production where you have a clear corridor, zip up some ceiling tile, pull your wire, put the floors down. So you have to know your project and adjust accordingly for it. Specifications. Being a drywall guy, most blueprints, they say use type X drywall unless noted otherwise. Well, that's great on the blueprints, but if you look in the specifications, it might say moisture resistant drywall in all wet areas. So I have to pick up the added cost for the moisture resistant drywall. General requirements of a project. Are you bidding your typical scope of work? For example, I would bid studs and drywall insulation. Or are you bidding a specific scope of work where you need to pick up snow plowing, you need to pick up temporary toilets, fire extinguishers, those sorts of items. Always be aware of your bid schedule. Let's say you do your quantity takeoff and you figure out your estimate and you come up with 200 man days of painting. Can you do 5 men for 40 days? Sounds like a good sized crew. What if your duration days are only 10 days instead of the 40? How do you adjust accordingly for that? Do you need to pick up overtime? Do you need to pick up shift work? It's all added cost that needs to go into your estimate. Site limitations, parking. Can you park right on site? Do you need to pick up a shuttle to get your crew to and from the job every day? Job-specific conditions. If you're bidding a job in an existing space, a hospital, for example, a lot of hospitals now require badging. You got to get a badge so you can have workers on site so the hospital knows who's working there. Well, let's say the badging takes 4 hours per worker. You figure there's going to be 30 workers on site, 4 hours times 30 comes out to be 15 man days. There's 15 man days you don't have in your production, they need to figure somewhere else on your project, on your estimate. Last thing I want to talk about is retainer. Typically on a job, you're going to see retainer as 10% over the first 50% of the project. Let's say you have a 3-year project and it is heavy on the material, so you hit your 50% complete in the first year of the project. That means you're going to be carrying that 10% or $250,000 for the remainder of the project, or 2 years. So that's money that's right out of your cash flow for 2 years that you need to account for somehow in your bid.
We've talked a lot about the GCs at the beginning of the half, mostly revolving around public bid stuff where you have bid bonds and that sort of thing. And as an estimator, there's a lot of strategy. Grant was talking earlier about alternates and how it made the difference between being low and not low. And some guys might play the game with, I don't think they're going to take this alternate, or I know they're over budget, so they're going to be looking to save money. So there's a lot of strategy, and well, maybe I can save them money and make myself low, or maybe I know there isn't, and I'm a roofer, there might be an allowance for deck replacement, and they might say include so much bad deck in your price. Well, I might know there's no bad deck, so if I put a huge allowance in, it might price me out of the job. But if I run into more than I expect, I might take a risk. So there's a lot of games that we all play, trying to be competitive to get the job, but then not losing money on the job. The big difference, though, is a public versus private. On a public bid, that's it. You turn it in, it's done. You don't get a chance to talk to the owner and go, hey, I made a mistake, or you know what, I found a better price on my material I can save, a couple $1,000s here. Once you submit it, it's over, you live with it. GCs too, we all are living with that bid. Versus the private projects, you might have a relationship with the owner, and he might say, hey, you know what, I'd like to work with you, but I got a price that's better. Can we sit down and see if we can make this work? Or they might always work with you, but they're getting other prices just to keep you honest. Grant again mentioned, relationships, how important it is. Grant might get 10 different roofers giving them pricing, and they might all be responsive bids, but he might go, geez, these guys are a pain, these guys are good, but this guy really helped me out, so I want to help him out if I can. So we might have that opportunity as a sub to work with the GC and maybe get the job, not even being the low bid on bid day, but because he has the opportunity to pick who he wants to work with. GCs don't necessarily get that same look from a public bid that we might get on a public bid as a sub trade. So it's really important to understand what kind of situation are you in and how can you best help the guys on the GC side. Because if my friendly GC over there doesn't get the job and a non-friendly GC does, my chances of getting the job are very bad. But if I can give my friendly GC an advantage, I've got a better chance of getting the work too. So I want to make sure that I'm giving them the information, maybe even 2 or 3 days in advance, so he can come back and go, gee, Trevor, you missed this. You need to pick this up. And then when I give my pricing to the less favorable guy, I might not give him much time to analyze it. I might give it to him at the last minute, so at least I got my foot in the door. But I'm not giving him a chance to shop my price and go find out if there's somebody that'll do it for less. On my side, I get it all the time, weekly. I got a bid due in an hour. I don't have a price for roofing. I need a price. And I'll tell you what, if any of these guys call me in the room, I'll drop what I'm doing and I will get it because they're going to work with me if they get the job. Often though, I'll drop what I'm doing, I'll help a guy out, and then some other guy's doing the work. And I know they didn't have a price from them when they got the bid, and now they're working with someone else. Guess what? Next time that guy needs a price, he probably isn't going to get it from me, and if he does, it's probably not going to make him very competitive. So, just realize that the relationship's being built and how people treat you and how you want to be treated, it all goes kind of in the equation.
I'm a concrete and site work subcontractor. One thing I noticed sitting there listening to the general contractors is there's a common thread between subs and generals. You have to know your costs. You have to know what your costs are, your home office costs, your direct costs, and get that covered in the bid. Do I have any concrete or excavation contractors in here? I got one. Any other sub-trades? Carpentry? We've got a carpenter. Question. What's a labor cost?
So, $52.
But he's only getting 24 in his check. Where's the rest? Very important, very tough lesson that young companies, young estimators learn is what you write, your hourly rate, your $24.93 for a 310 labor right now, isn't what a 310 laborer costs. So we've done a very good job of talking about recovery, cost recovery, overhead recovery, home office recovery, and I've listed on the next slide. There's everything I could think of was with your home office costs, your salaries, your labor burden is a huge factor for a self-performing contractor that we haven't really talked about yet. I printed out a sample labor rate sheet that we use for local 310 laborers. This is their updated rate. Their taxable hourly rate in their check is $24.53. So most people in their estimate will say, all right, $23.53. No, you have fringe benefits. Even if you're not union, you have fringe benefits. Health insurance, pension, FICA, FUTA, SUTA, payroll taxes, workers' comp insurance. All that needs to be accounted for and recovered in your bid. So it might be 27% or 50% of your hourly rate, but whatever it is, you need to figure out what it is and get that recovered as part of your costs. Also, home office recovery as a sub-trade, we've talked about that too. General contractors talked about all their costs in putting a bid together. You need to have your permits, you need to have your insurances. Sub-trades need to have that covered as well. You just need to be aware that your material costs, your labor costs, your home office costs. Even though some material, for example, someone might quote $5,000 to deliver for cabinets on a project. Is that what the cabinets really cost? Do you have to cover delivery costs? Do you have fuel surcharges? Do you have unloading, just unpacking? What are you going to do with the trash, the cleanup to the dumpster? Who's got the dumpster? So there's a lot of extra costs that need to be factored in and included. Anybody have any questions about labor rates? I did a sample labor rate sheet. If anybody wants to see it, I'll have it around afterwards, but that was my 2 cents.
We kind of talked about a lot of these on the general contractor side. It's a little different for a GC than a sub, but we all pay these same fees. A big GC might get a better bonding rate than a really small operation, but we still have a rate. And as an estimator, a lot of times on bids, they want to know what is your bond rate, because that might be an alternate. They might say, we haven't decided if we want to bond this job, but we might. So average is something usually under 1%, but if you're, say, a poorly funded company or you've had some issues in the past, your bond rate might be 3%. That's a red light. When an owner sees your bonding rate being out of line with the norm, there's a reason why you're out of line. So I know a lot of contractors that'll lie about their bonding rate and eat the difference because they'd rather get the job. So sometimes you do see that, and again, it's in that gaming. You sometimes want to put a number that's going to make you competitive, but also cover your cost. The insurance. I'm sorry, I skipped that. For us, we're roofers. We're high risk. Everything we do, it's about as dangerous as it gets. We're working up above. There's people working below us. So not only we're worried about our people falling or getting hurt, but we're worried that they're going to kick something off the roof and hurt the mason putting the walls up below us. A lot of risk. Our insurance is all about the man hours. So for every hour I have a guy on the job, or every dollar I pay a person, I'm paying a certain percentage for my liability insurance. My auto insurance is more fixed by the number of vehicles. At the end of every year, we get audited. They look at how many man hours I had for each cost. A roofer versus a sheet metal guy versus a truck driver. And at the end of the year, we pay the difference. So then we might assume we're going to have X amount of hours, but we maybe had more. So now we're going to write a check for the difference. So accounting for it in our bid, knowing that every hour I sell, I've got that covered. So at the end of the year, if I get a $100,000 bill because we had a good year, we did more volume than we expected, we collected that $100,000 over the year. It's not like it's insurance, it's a flat price. I need to collect $100,000 over the course of the year and it's done. No, it's variable. It moves with how much work we do. So in a good year, your insurance could be real high. And in a bad year, you might not pay much in insurance. You might even get a credit back. BWC, this is something on the estimating side can make or break you. And it's not so much on your estimate, but it's on the management of your jobs and running your companies. If you don't manage your BWC, your rate will make you uncompetitive. Every time you have an incident or have an accident or have a claim, it's going to affect that rate. And that rate stays with you for, what's it, 5 years? It takes a year to show up, and then it's on for 5. So if you have a major claim, you might lose a competitive edge for 6 years based on how long that experience stays with you. So managing that rate and keeping it competitive is going to allow your estimate to get you work. And obviously when your rates get high and you're not doing more work, all your fixed costs of doing business has stayed the same, but you're doing less volume, so you're becoming less and less competitive, not more and more. So keeping your arms around all those different components is what's going to keep you in business. Management, there's a lot of, kind of talked about it, and I forget which one the GC said, you have a superintendent on site, he's going to be there for 3 months or whatever. That's a direct cost versus, the person answering the phone, the guy writing the checks, all the other people in the office that are supporting what's going on in the field, the truck drivers collecting materials as they come into the warehouse and then getting them the job. Those are sometimes a little bit harder to pin down right to a job, but somehow you need to account for those indirect costs just like you're accounting for the direct costs. And that's a moving target. You learn from experience. You might learn that just say trucking, in John Arsena's example, whether it be downtown or in the country, you're going to look back at your past history and go, geez, I had to pay $10 a day for parking. Every day my guys were there, and I had 10 guys there every day. I have to factor in that parking into my price because I'm paying for it. So those are things that sometimes you don't learn until you make the mistake and you're paying out of pocket, but those are mistakes you don't want to make more than once. Kind of touched on support staff, trucking, warehousing. Pricing right now on materials is kind of going crazy with gas. So a lot of it is I'm bidding a job today and it might not go for 1 quarter, 2 quarters, a year, 2 years. I bid a lot of work that doesn't happen for 4 or 5 years. Sometimes it's beneficial for me to buy a job, put it in my warehouse, and beat 2 price increases. Even though I've got to double handle the materials now, it still might be more competitive than taking a 10% price increase. At other times, there might be so much material, it might be too much to warehouse or unloading it and everything else. You might be better off paying the additional cost, working with your suppliers to lock in on prices. Those are important, and GCs and everybody in their office does it different. I know a lot of GCs, they have an estimator who passes the job off to a project manager. For the sub-trades, at least in our office, we bid the job and manage it. So as an estimator, I'm thinking about what does it cost today, and as a project manager, I want to buy it for what I figured or better. I don't want to be paying an extra 10% because I forgot about the increase. So keeping an eye on all those things are really important, not just in your estimate, but actually making money when you do the job. Because we can have the best estimate and manage the job poorly and not make any money even though you had a good estimate. Or sometimes have a bad estimate, but find a way to manage it the right way, have the right crew mix, buy the materials the right way, cut out the phasing if possible, and all of a sudden save a job that maybe you would have lost money on and break even or turn a profit. And at the end of the day, if we're not making money or at least covering our costs, we're not going to be in business very long. So one more slide, okay. Economy of scale. The competitiveness with jobs, talking about the library job, there's a multi-million-dollar job. The GCs in town are all got their eyes on those jobs because there are only so many of those. They're with a public entity where the money's good. They don't have to worry about a private owner being able to write the check. So there's a lot of competitiveness on that. The material pricing is competitive. The subcontractor's pricing is competitive. The general conditions is competitive. The margin of error is very small. So when you're bidding a big project, you got to be competitive. Your pencil's got to be sharpened. Now, if you're bidding a small build out or a little addition or something, it might not have so much attention. One, you're not going to be able to dangle a carrot in front of your supplier and buy a better material pricing because guess what? You're buying 10 sheets of plywood. It is what it is. Pull them off the rack. That's the price. So you also have the opportunity to maybe make a little bit more money. You still have to do all the paperwork like the $1 million project, even though it's a $10,000 project. So a lot of the office costs, even though it's small, you're still doing all the same things in the office. So your costs to manage it are more expensive, so you should make, percentage-wise, maybe a little bit more. Also the fact there's less people looking at it. If I've got 20 roofers bidding the same project to every GC in town versus one owner calling 3 guys, I'd rather have that 30% chance every day of the week than trying to bid with 20 people. My success rate's just going to be that much better. So knowing, again, what is the situation you're in and how to address it and treat it. So 1, you have the best chance of getting the job, but 2, you also have the best chance of maximizing your profits. Always, talk about contract requirements. There's liquidated damages in the contract. If you don't finish by the completion date, there's a cost associated to missing the date. So you always want to be on time, you want to be on budget, and you want your customer to be happy. I mean, the worst thing you can do is have a good estimate, do a good job, but butt heads with the owner the whole way. Now you've got an owner that's telling everybody he knows how horrible of an experience it was, even though everything went right, but the experience was bad. And usually the guy that is building that multi-million-dollar building, that private owner, or the large turner or somebody like that, they talk to other people. So all of a sudden that good word of mouth or bad word of mouth spreads really fast, and you only want good things going out. And sometimes it means doing things that cost you money and you're not getting paid for to keep that good reputation. And a lot of guys in this room, companies have been around a long time, and it's not because they fight over every little thing. Sometimes the little things you can't fight over. You have to just do it because, you know what, even though the owner's wrong, he expected it, and I want to work for him again, or I want him to tell his buddies that, I'm the guy to call when they need a new roof. So all that comes into play in how to manage a deal as well as estimating.
We just want to recap and make sure that we covered the objectives that we sought out when we first started, which was to understand the different types of delivery models. We went through the different types of documents and different types of way that an owner or someone would ask for a number. How to set up an estimate, we went through that pretty extensively, different divisions of CSIs, and what to look out for on bid days, soft costs and hard costs, and understanding all those costs, as well as what the sub-trades look at perspective-wise, and getting what they go into and put together their numbers, how that affects the GC, and what they need to account for at the end of the day. So, in closing, hope this was a good experience for you all.